Okay, it's happening. I'm getting involved in French cleat life. And in this video, I'm going to build this French cleat sanding station, which holds my random orbital sander, my hand sander, this little sanding mouse here, all my sanding discs, as well as these two rolls of sandpaper down here. This is a beginner level build, assembled using rabbets and dados, with a decent helping of wood glue and 18 gauge brad nails to hold it all together. I'm also into 3D printing stuff, so there is a couple of simple 3D printed parts involved here to hold the sandpaper rail in place. Let's get after it. Oh, before I forget, my name's Adam and welcome to my YouTube channel. The first step in this build is to cut the plywood down to the right width. I'm using 18mm construction ply here and running it through my DeWalt 7485 contractor saw, which is hooked up to a little Evolution R15 shop vac for dust collection. I've not had these that long, but plan to do a newbie's perspective review of both in an up and coming video, but would welcome views from you guys if that would be a video worth making, or not, so please do let me know in the comments. Okay, with those cuts successfully done, albeit with a note to self to design a longer outfeed table next time, it's time to move on to step 2 in my workflow and cut these bits into the right length. I'm going to use my Hikoki C8FSHG sliding compound miter saw to cut these to length, which currently lives on the floor, so here I am getting it all set up. I'm running it as it came out of the box with the stock blade. The absence of a longer fence with a stop on it for repeat cuts means that for now I need to measure each cut, mark it, cut it and repeat the process until I'm done. Right, so with all the components now cut to their correct lengths, my final job here is to label them all up, ready for step 3, which is marking up all the rabbet and dado cuts. I'm not the guy who can make things up on the fly. I find that my builds are much more successful when I'm working to detailed plans, and so I design everything I make in Fusion 360 first, and then create engineering drawings to follow throughout the build. So here, I'm translating all the rabbet and dado cuts onto my workpieces with as much accuracy as possible. Over time, as I mature as a woodworker, I'm sure I'll be able to remove this much measuring and marking out from my workflow, but for now, it's slow and steady until everything is all marked up and ready to go for the next bit. So out comes the table saw again, and I'm excited about this bit because I get to use my new mitre gauge for the first time. Full disclosure, before I started shooting this video, I did a few practice cuts with the standard DeWalt mitre gauge that came with the saw, which everyone knows is pretty bad. And my experience confirms that it is indeed pretty bad. There was so much play in it, despite having upgraded the mitre bar with a 3D printed version I got from Etsy, that I just couldn't get anywhere near an accurate cut. A shout out to Dennis from Hooked on Wood, whose videos helped me decide to get this one made by Enjoy Wood, which feels pretty solid. One critical flaw in my plan is that I can't really tell where the cut line of the blade is. That would be one advantage of using a cross-cutting sled, of course. But I haven't made one of those yet, so instead I've marked a line on the table saw insert to show the cut line. No dado blade, of course. I'm in the UK, and besides, this table saw won't take one, so I'm doing multiple passes to get the 18mm width I need. I'm eyeballing this and creeping up on the cut as best I can, which on the whole is working out fine, although I did mess up more than once, here and here. Oh well, an opportunity to recut these bits and get more practice in, I guess. The grooves that hold the sanding disc shelves were trickier to cut. They're 3.6mm wide, as that's the size of the hardboard I'm using, but the kerf of this blade is 2.8mm, so I'm making a cut, then shimmying the workpiece over ever so slightly to get the 3.6 width. Second note to self, design a fence for your mitre gauge, with a measure and a flip stop, and look for a cross-cutting sled video for inspiration. So, with all the rabbets and grooves cut, now I've got a couple of things left to do before I put this thing together. One is drill the holes for the sandpaper rail, which I'm doing here with a 30mm Forstner bit. I'm freehanding this with my drill, so I've clamped the piece I'm drilling to my workbench with a sacrificial bit of scrap in between so I don't damage it. Next, I need to cut the slots on the orbital sander shelf for the cable to slot into when I'm storing it away. My first attempt at this went very wrong due to my complete incompetence with my router. As you can see, I'm using the edge guide to make sure I'm nice and straight, and I decided to take about 5mm passes to be on the safe side. The first pass was going fine, but things got very sketchy after that. And this shot explains why. The edge guide is actually nowhere near the edge of the wood, and I ended up cutting a channel that couldn't have been more wonky if I'd tried. I can laugh now, but this really frustrated me at the time. So at this stage in the build I called it a day and came back the next day and made a completely new piece. And this time I clamped a straight edge to the plywood and used that as a guide for my router. I was in a mood when I did that, so I didn't film it, but the results were a lot better. Well, the edges were straight at least. I've laid out the two side panels and the top and bottom panels, and I'm applying wood glue to the rabbets and the ends and making sure I've got good coverage across all these pieces. Now it's just a case of putting these parts together, making sure we're square, and then popping some 18 gauge 30mm brads in to hold firm while the glue dries. I love this brad nailer, by the way. I've used this thing so much since I bought it. I know it's only a Works one, so not comparable to a DeWalt or a Milwaukee, but for me it's been excellent and well worth the investment if you do a lot of stuff like this. And because I don't have to clamp this up and wait, I can now put the middle panel in and the shelf for the orbital sander. I am clamping that shelf in as I can't properly reach that inside edge with the brad nailer, so I'll leave this to dry for now and turn my attention to the last few leftover bits to cut before I can finish this thing off and get it hung on the wall. For aesthetic purposes, I'm going to put a backing on this sander station, otherwise you'd see a mixture of white wall and cleats behind it. I'm just using some 3.6mm hardboard from my local Wicks, as I don't think this needs to be structural at all. With a very rusty and blunt 6-pound saw I had lying around outside, I'm rough cutting this down to close to the required size so I can then trim it up on the table saw. Here I'm cutting 2 bits of ply to width, and these parts will go on the front to partially hide the orbital sander plug and to serve as a place for me to put a hacksaw blade so I can feed the sandpaper rolls through it and use it to tear off however much I need. I also need 7 shelves for the sanding discs to sit on, which I cut to width on the table saw and chop up into the right depth with my miter saw. Finishing straight now, and it's time to assemble the last few bits. So on goes the backing piece, glue it up, brad it in to hold it whilst the glue dries. Next the 2 front rail things, same method, glue and brad nails. Now my 3D printed parts come into play. These are made from PLA and are a little top hat shaped piece with a 10mm deep housing in the centre where a spring is designed to go. And I got tolerances spot on here so the spring friction fits inside really tightly. I've essentially just copied a loo roll holder design here with 2 springy things either end holding a bar in place with the sandpaper rolls over the bar. When I need to change them, I can just pull the bar out and replace in the same manner you'd replace a loo roll. This roller, by the way, is just made from a pole I stole from an old tent my daughters used to have until I stole it, but they haven't noticed, so it's all good. I'm using CA glue with an activator to stick the PLA parts in, and I'm slightly rolling the dice that it won't corrode the plastic and that it will be strong enough to hold them in place. My rigorous testing protocol confirms to me that this solution will be fine for now. Finally, the bit I've been waiting for this whole build, and that is to put these shelves in. I don't know why I deliberately saved these to last, but I think it might have something to do with how nervous I was making all the dado cuts and the worry that they won't all line up properly. Some of these are going in nicely and some are pretty loose, so I'm popping more CA glue in there to hold them in place. Some are pretty tight, but nothing a battered rubber hammer and some leftover ply can't overcome. And just as I feel myself celebrating that I finished, I realise that I need to hang this thing on the wall, so I better actually attach the French cleat itself. So on goes the glue, and in goes the brads to hold it in place. And the final finishing touch is attaching the hacksaw blade on the front, so I can thread the sandpaper roll through it and rip off however much I need. I'm using a couple of spare washers I had lying around as spacers and screwing it in with the smallest screws I could find. I think these are 16mm. And there we have it. My first foray into French cleats, my first step in getting this shed organised, and my first ever YouTube video. I know it's just a box, and an imperfect one at that, but it's more than that to me. This little box has helped me overcome a fear of making videos like this and putting a little bit of myself out into the world. And so every time I look at this, it will represent courage and remind me that I can achieve the things I want to achieve if I just put my mind to it. And that, I guess, is the wonder of woodworking. Thanks for watching and take care.